G'day guys and welcome. Tonight, I'm going to read you some true creepy encounters. So as I used to say many moons ago, strap yourselves in as we journey into the unknown. Summer after 5th grade, around the end of June, I went garage sailing with my mum and grandma in the neighbouring town. We had a lot of good buys. The last place we hit up was a housing addition at the edge of the town where a lot of old people and empty nesters lived. It was kind of boring, but I thought I would poke around just in case. My mum and gran let me go ahead of them while they browsed, so I went up to the next house. It looked pretty normal. I mean, it looked the same as every other house in the addition. Maybe not as many frills, but nothing out of place really. There wasn't a sign in the yard, but the garage door was open and there were tables out. A guy was sitting in the lawn chair at the back of the garage, so legit, I suppose. So I went in. There wasn't a lot of selection. An old coffee maker, throw pillows. There was a rack of plus-size women's clothing and shoes, but no men's clothes or shoes. Anything that suggested a man lived there. The man at the back of the garage sat there smiling the whole time. He was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. He had a moustache, he was bald at the top, and had a fringe of brown hair that tapered down his neck. He wore a wolf t-shirt and denim cutoffs. He kept crossing and uncrossing his very hairy legs, like with rhythm, and kind of swinging them. Beneath another table was a huge box of naked Barbies priced at 50 cents a piece. I bent down to inspect them. First of all, the Barbie's hair was sticky and crusty, like someone put glue in them. Second of all, they smelt terrible, like rotten or something. Body odor? Just inconceivably foul. I was pulling away when the man in the back of the garage started asking me questions like, how old was I? Where did I go to school? He asked me if I like Barbies. Not really interested, I said. He started talking about his cocker spaniel named Spiffy or something and let the dog out when it started scratching on the garage door. It started growling at him like snarling, and it ran around to the back of the house. By then, I decided I was done here. He hadn't really done anything, but he just gave me the creeps. Leaving already? He sounded disappointed. I told him to have a nice day and ran off to my mum and gran, but I didn't tell my mum about the creeper. I just told her he had a crap selection. Nothing she would have liked anyway. A week or so later, we saw on the news that a man broke into a woman's house, tried on all her clothes, molested her daughter, and hosted a garage sale at their house, at that housing addition. So I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. For those of you who aren't familiar, every year we have a music festival called Riverbend on the Tennessee River. The end of the show is celebrated with one of the best firework displays in the world. It's held to get into or close to the festival on the last day. It's like everyone in the southeast United States wants to come see the fireworks. My best friend Tara and I wanted to find a good vantage point that would overlook the river and watch the fireworks. We drove up a ridge near the river and pulled off into a gravel parking lot where we found several other people with the same idea as us. Some trees were in the way, and we noticed a trail that went down the ridge. We walked about 40 yards down the trail and came to a clearing where we could see the river perfectly. We were talking and waiting on the fireworks to start when we started to hear rustling down the trail. I thought I saw a person's silhouette move between some trees on down the ridge. Tara had a small keychain flashlight, and she took it out and shined it down the trail. We didn't see anything, but we kept hearing rustling, but not seeing anything. We finally started to think it was just a really noisy squirrel. The fireworks started and had been going on for about a minute when I heard a stick break right by me. We turned around and looked, but couldn't see anything. Tara turned on her light and there was a man standing literally 5 feet away from me. It was so dark and we couldn't see him at all until the light was on him. It was like a horror movie scene. We immediately started heading up the trail, and the whole way, He was talking. He asked us things like, "Where are you going? What are your names? What are two pretty things like you doing here?" We ignored him and kept walking. Then he started getting angry and saying, "You're not listening. You get back here now. You know, nobody could hear the screams over the fireworks, and I have a knife. You don't even know my name. Nobody will ever catch me if I hurt you." It was at that moment that we started to shit ourselves, and we started running. We got to the top of the hill where two kids were playing, and I saw their dad standing further back. I went up to the kids and told them that their dad wanted them so they would get close to their dad and safe from the creepy guy. I then walked over to their dad and told them about the man who followed us out of the trail. I asked him if he cared if we stood with him until the man was gone. He said of course and thanked us for sending his kids in his direction. That fucking creep stood at the beginning of the trail and watched us for a while, then finally went back into the woods. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We were allowed to bring our bare essentials, but we weren't allowed to bring food or water since part of our training was in identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike to find a spot to set up camp. First I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later for pickup. And I was loving life. Just me and nature. I had no fears even as night began to fall. I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire and had a great feeling of peace. I slept well that night but woke up thirsty. My search for a water source began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, placed the tablets in the water and boiled it for good measure. Ugh, what a crappy taste, but at least I was hydrated. All went well and I had a great time, until my last day. It was early afternoon on the last day and time to break camp. I cleaned up my camp area and hiked out to my drop-off spot. As I sat, leaning against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that had to be my pickup. As I waited, a vehicle that I've never seen before pulled up on the dirt path in front of me. Immediately, I realized that I didn't know the man who was driving. He gave me an odd look, and my gut told me that he was bad news. He asked what I was doing there and if I was alone. I said that my friends were behind me breaking camp. He gave me a knowing look, got back in his vehicle, and rode off. At that point, I was terrified. Something told me that I had to hide, and fast, so I ran into the woods and hid, but as I ran, I heard the car come back. I stayed as quiet as I could and remained hidden. I heard someone get out of a car, then I heard his voice. That confirmed that it was him calling to me and walking through the brush looking for me. Eventually, he gave up and I heard the car door slam, the engine start, and the car pull away. Going back to my drop-off point was now not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I saw a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what happened to me. He told me that I had done the right thing since a young woman had been raped the night before and the police and forest service had been searching the area. Happily, he drove me to the base camp where I learnt another girl in my class had a creepy encounter with a man the night before. She scared him away by blowing a brass whistle until help arrived. It was a normal Saturday. I had woken up super early and decided to just be lazy all day. Around 10 PM came, and I decided to get into bed and watch some South Park. I had fallen asleep around midnight, I think. The actual encounter happened very fast. I had woken up at 4:43 AM with an overwhelming feeling of dread. It was dark, but it only took me a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to my surroundings. I looked at my clock, which is right next to the door, and I noticed a figure standing in the doorway no more than 8 feet from me. He was staring at me with the sickest grin I had ever seen. The guy was a fucking monster, ugly and big as hell. I froze. I had no idea what was happening. So I jumped out of bed after a few seconds and yelled, "Who is that? Get the fuck out of here now!" As I rushed to the door to slam it shut, the man slowly closed the door, still staring at me with that malicious grin. I locked the door but heard very heavy footsteps walk away very slowly. This guy wasn't here to rob me, I can tell you that. The way he shut my door was too calm for any two-bit thief that just got caught. I heard him walk to the basement door, and he left. I immediately called the cops and they showed up within minutes. They did a walkthrough of my house and just chalked it up to some drunk guy wandering through houses. I told them that this guy could have been watching me for hours for all I knew, but they obviously dismissed it. Once the police left, I woke up my floor mate who was a chick. She happened to be sleeping throughout the whole ordeal. For reference, she had gotten in a few hours after I fell asleep, and she said she locked both the deadbolt and the normal lock. They were both unlocked. Well, simple solution. I changed the locks. But the thing that worries me the most is that the guy specifically came into my house. I don't know how he got in, and I don't know if he's watching me or someone in the house, but I'm freaked the fuck out. Once I told everyone that was home, they didn't seem very concerned. What the flying fuck? I guess their opinions would have changed if they'd seen this man like I had. His grin was so eerie, and his face was messed up, but the way he calmly shut my door as I charged towards him is actually nauseating. When I was about 15 or so, my family was invited to a wedding out of town. I was super excited to get dressed up and see my friends who lived in the area. The wedding was great, but for whatever reason, my dad decided we should drive back that night. We all complained that we were tired and just wanted to crash at my grandparents' place, but he was adamant, so we headed home. For whatever reason, we had taken 2 cars. I think my dad met us down there, so he had his truck and my brother rode with him. I was in the van with my mum and my sister. Around 12:30 or 1 AM, my dad calls my mum and says he needs to stop for gas. They discuss the closest station and agree it's in a not so nice part of town of Palm Beach County. It's kind of this weird ghetto strip that runs between it and Boca. My dad pulls into the station first and parks at a pump, but my mum's tank is full, so she parks the van sort of out of the way and gets out to buy a cup of coffee and talk to my dad. I'm just sitting in the front seat with my sister, kind of falling asleep in the middle row of seats when this skinny, greasy looking guy comes around the corner. His teeth were yellow from cigarettes or something worse, and he got this freaky smile on his face when he saw me. I told my sister to grab my phone, call my mum, and hide under the small pile of pillows we had in the van. Hey, you got some change? I need to buy some gas. I quickly pretend that I'm deaf and sign whatever I know, so I'm throwing out things like, cookie tomorrow, mum, dad, bear, play. The guy comes up to the window and starts knocking on it, then mentioning for me to roll down the windows or unlock the door. Honestly, I don't know what the hell he was thinking. My sister is hiding under a makeshift shield and I can hear her finally connect on the cell phone just as the guy tries to unlock the fucking door of the van. I just scream, "Daddy!" And around the pump comes my dad, wrench in one hand and phone in the other. Now, my dad is a big guy, he's close to 6'5" and built like a tank. My friends joke that he looks like a mafia boss or something. I only hope that this creep was pissing himself when my dad came around the corner of the pump and said, "Is there a problem here?" The guy instantly jumped away from the van and put his hands up. He tried stammering out that he just needed some money for gas until my dad came even closer and said, "So you felt the need to ask this young lady when I'm right over there?" The guy booked it. I don't know if he was homeless or crazy or both, but I'm glad I've got my dad. My wife and I just purchased our first home and had our first kid. The house was being built by the builders and we would drive past the house every so often just to look and see how our house was coming along. We started visiting the house at night and noticed a car parked out front of our house. It was strange, but We figured it was probably just one of the workers leaving their car overnight. Sometimes the car would be there, sometimes it wasn't. We didn't think too much of it. So fast forward a few months and our house is built. The house is empty and we're slowly moving everything in during the first week. As for the mysterious car, it started showing up late at night, but not parking directly in front of our house anymore, but about 50 feet away by a nearby park. Now keep in mind, we're the only house on the block. This was a brand new development and we're literally the first house built. So we were just this lonesome house in the middle of the desert, a few blocks away from the nearest neighborhood. Because I worked late at night and my wife spent many nights alone, my wife demanded we buy a security system, which I oblige. It's my day off and I spend it organizing stuff from the moving boxes and hanging out with my 6-month-old son. My wife is at work. I realize that there are no diapers or wipes, so I call my mother-in-law and ask her if she could swing by to drop some off. I tell her that I will leave the front door unlocked because I'll be taking a nap with my son. A few hours later, my son is fast asleep on our bed and I decide to cuddle up with him to go to sleep myself. I lay down when I hear the door chime of my security alarm for the front door. I know it's my mother-in-law and I really didn't feel like talking to her, so I figured I would just lay there and pretend to be asleep, hoping she wouldn't come upstairs. I hear the footsteps of her coming up the stairs, but she's moving slowly. I thought it was weird, but figured she knew we were sleeping and didn't want to wake us up. My back is facing the door to my bedroom and I hear her open the door. I get into my pretend to sleep mode and stay still. I hear a quick breath of air, as if she was startled to see us sleeping. No other noise is made and I assume she's just standing there. I think to myself, okay, go away now, but it takes a full minute or two before I hear her slowly tiptoeing out of my room, downstairs, and then leaving the house. As soon as I hear the door chime, I pop out of bed and walk downstairs to grab the diapers, but they aren't there. I think, what the fuck? She showed up and didn't even leave the diapers. I run over to the front window when she's gone. During this whole event, my phone was off and charging, so I turn it on to see I have a new voicemail. It's from my mother-in-law. She said, "Sorry honey, I'm not able to come over and bring those diapers. I got caught up in other plans. Have a nice nap." I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts. My family's first home was a tiny 2-bedroom house, but it was idyllic and really nice. It was on a corner lot next to a busy street, but there was a huge yard and a big natural pond in the back. Next to the pond was a totally expansive wooded area. I still remember what happened because, especially for my small mind to process at the time, this was really terrifying to me then, and according to my mother, I had reoccurring nightmares about this, but even today, it's still kind of disturbing. My father would leave for work every day early in the morning, and a lot of times I would wake up with him, and subsequently my mum too. She stayed at home to take care of me, however, and our days usually started very early. On one of these mornings, my mum decided to take a shower before she did her other things typical of any other day of the week. While she did that, I played in the kitchen by myself on the floor. Our old kitchen was like a galley style and sort of narrow, and at the end of the room, directly ahead of me, was our back door and a porch that my dad had built. On this day, I was playing and all of a sudden, a man ran onto the back porch and started banging at the door to be let in. We hadn't invited anyone over, not especially some man, and guests were pretty infrequent anyway, but this was no ordinary man. He was literally pounding on the door, and through the window in the door, I could see him staring at me on the floor, and then he started begging me to let him in. I just sat on the floor, probably in mild shock, and stared back at him. This man didn't even look away once to see if he could flag down help elsewhere, like passing motorists on the busy street around the corner if he so desperately needed it. He was raising his voice and he was asking me to come to the door and let him inside. Asking a child, a very young child, to let a stranger inside. That's rule number 1 that you don't break, and every child in America is told to obey, and luckily I had enough sense apparently to know this. He might have realized this because I wasn't moving, and then all of a sudden he started demanding that I open the door. He was yelling things like, "Come on kid, just let me in," and at this point in my memory, I believe I noticed he was wearing like a wig, a white electric looking wig, because his hair was very wild. And now he was absolutely pounding the door even harder and yelling, and I distinctly remember him saying something like, "Don't get mummy," or something like that, because I had gotten off the floor now and I was banging on the bathroom door to get my mum. I told her that there was someone outside, and only dressed in just a towel, she came out to see, and this is what gets me. He jumps off of the back porch, like maybe a decent 5 feet, because my house is set on a hill and the porch was elevated off that. So he runs, and according to my mum, into the woods behind our house. My mum called the police, but they never found him. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had let him inside the house, if he sincerely needed help. Like, maybe he was being chased and he wasn't actually the threat. Crime never happens in our town ever, so it's hard to believe that that's the case. We're not friendly with our neighbours in any way, and never knew if this man had also approached them asking for the same thing. But I'll never forget this. This is actually my friend's story, but I was almost a daily guest at her house, so I think I might be able to tell it like she would. She lived at her parents' house. We were about 17 or 18 years old, and they had just moved into a big house from a small apartment. They had a dog who was extremely well behaved, but sometimes in the middle of the night, he would start growling and barking. One early morning, my friend's dad followed the dog to the kitchen where he saw a young man trying to get through the window. The man got away before the police got there, but the growling and barking didn't stop, and sometimes we could all hear weird sounds like someone was walking on the roof of the house or something. Her dad would often have to look up into the attic and saw nothing, so he blamed these sounds on the weather. Changes in heat and cold and humidity making the woods crack. This went on for a few years. A few nights a week, the dog would growl and they would hear what sounded like footsteps. I spent some nights there, and one time my friend woke up, telling me to just listen. Years later, a few years after my friend moved out from her parents' place, her dad was doing something in the attic when he found a tiny little door in the far corner. He had never noticed it before because the corner of this attic was really dark, but he opened that tiny little door, and what he saw in the beam of his flashlight really freaked everyone out. He saw a dirty mattress, some burnt out candles, and candy wrappers. It's been years since she told me what her father saw, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Someone had actually been living in their attic, maybe the guy who tried to climb in through the window. All I know is, she's not here anymore to tell you the story, so I hope I did it justice. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a pretty weird part of Sydney. Not overly dangerous, but a lot of druggies and weirdos who can really creep you out late at night, which is when this took place, of course. I'd just gotten off the train and started my 10-minute walk home. It was cold and it was late, almost midnight, so I was moving quick to get home. I was catching up to this guy who dressed in a big bomber jacket and was singing to himself. I figured he was just another local oddball, and kept walking along next to him, wishing I'd remember my headphones because he was singing shit. Him and I walked along about a meter or two apart, and at some point, a woman about my age came out of a side street carrying a bunch of books. We were all walking together in a nice, awkward sort of situation as this guy sung, when he suddenly piped up and said to the girl in a creepy, raspy voice, "Excuse me, but why are you carrying a book about Bikram yoga?" The girl responded politely that she was studying to be a yoga instructor, and the guy stated that he was in fact a yoga instructor, and they struck up a slow and slightly uncomfortable conversation. Initially, I was just relieved he wasn't talking to me. I'm not a tough guy at all, and confrontation freaks me out, so I was glad I didn't have to speak to him. I kept walking just ahead of them though, and I'm listening into the conversation. I began to notice that the guy seemed to know fuck all about yoga as they continued to talk, and his questions got stranger. He asked her what she was up to, if she lived with friends, or if she lived alone. I decided to walk a bit slower, so I stayed close to them in case anything went wrong, or the guy tried anything. I had no idea what I'd do if push came to shove. I just felt like it was the right thing to do. So this all went on for another 5 minutes or so, and I was getting close to my street. The girl was obviously uncomfortable and just wanted the conversation to end. I was almost at my corner, and feeling my job as a gentleman was done, I decided to just take one look over my shoulder before I left them. I looked over my shoulder and stopped mid-stride. The guy was walking with the girl on his right, and in his left hand, obscured from her view, he was holding a knife. I stopped and stood there looking like an idiot. There was no one else around, just the three of us standing still, and the guy looked at me and shook his head, giving me a "just walk away buddy" kind of look, with anger in his eyes. Then I almost jumped when I heard a car horn, and I looked across the street to see a parked dark blue car with a man in driver's seat. He too was shaking his head at me with a look that sort of said, "Get out of here before something bad happens." This was a joint effort, and thinking back, I can remember car headlights following us for most of this way. I just hadn't taken any notice of it. It seems this was a joint effort by the two creepers. My heart was racing, and I was standing there in between this completely fucked up situation. It seemed like I was the only thing preventing this rape or kidnapping or whatever from going down, and I, with nothing resembling a weapon, felt very, very useless indeed. Not a word had been said so far, and in my terror, my mind flashed to something I once read about what you should do if you're attacked by a bear. I guess it was flight or fight, and I picked fight. I raised my arms up to try to look bigger and start screaming like an animal. I must have seemed completely deranged, but I got right up in the guy's face, and I still don't know how this worked, but it must have been so shocking that he just bolted, ran to the car, and sped away. All of this happening in the space of 10 seconds or so. After that, we called the police. The girl thanked me profusely, but after all of this, I couldn't even remember what the guy looked like, nor the number plate of the car. I just couldn't believe how fortunate it all was. I'd forgotten my headphones so I could hear the exchange. The fact I turned around for one last look, and the whole screaming and waving my arms around actually worked. I shudder to think what could have happened to the yoga student if everything didn't work out. I was 5 years old, and I was invited to a neighbour's birthday party. We lived in the quiet suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. It was an idyllic town. Trees lined the streets, looking over the neighbourhood like giant looming sentinels. It was early October. I remember this because the houses were decorated for Halloween. The boys' parents pulled out all of the stops to make their son's party one to remember. There was a slow-moving, sad-faced donkey that the smaller children were permitted to ride. I wasn't allowed to ride the donkey. I was a fat boy, even at age 5. I was also as loud as I was fat. Oh, that's not nice. It was my loud mouth that caused this pleasant afternoon of cake, ice cream and piñatas to quickly unravel into a horrifying nightmare. Aside from the usual accoutrement at a 7-year-old's party, there was a clown. The clown walked around silently, prancing and smiling, kind of like something from American Horror Story. He would laugh silently. He would do the old "I got your nose" trick and pull coins out from behind his ears. He made balloon animals and attempted to ride a unicycle. The other kids laughed, but I hated the clown. Everything about him made me uncomfortable, and because of this, my fat 5-year-old self decided it was a bad idea to give the clown a hard time. Birthday Boy announced aloud that it was time to head inside to see the special clown magic show. All the kids went into the living room and sat on the hardwood floor. I stood in the back. The clown proceeded with the magic show. He pulled a fake rabbit out of his hat and performed other hat tricks as I stood in the back of the room and jeered him. I would yell out how the tricks were done. The clown continued to silently smile, making no sound as he went about his magical presentation. His face said happiness, but his eyes screamed in rage at me. This went on for 15 minutes. The kids laughed as the clown fumbled through some crappy dime store magic tricks. I don't know if it was an act of mercy, but birthday boy's parents shouted, "Piñata time," and all of the kids ran outside to smash a cardboard donkey stuffed with candy. After a few minutes outside, all of the drink I drank throughout the day wanted out. I scurried back into the house in search of the toilet. The house was quiet, and the sun had shifted in the sky, leaving the kitchen and the adjoining hallway bathed in a murky early evening light. As I walked through the kitchen and into the hall, from a room in the hall stepped the clown into the hallway. He stood there staring at me, staring at him. It seemed like he was doing one of those Wild West showdowns from the cowboy movies my dad used to watch on television. He lurched down slowly toward me, his painted smile unwavering but his eyes bloodshot and filled with unbridled hatred. "Here, piggy piggy." I walked a few steps in reverse before spinning on my heels and trying to make it to the kitchen. I felt a large hand on my shoulder. I was spun around forcefully and fell to the floor. The clown stood above me for a moment before putting a giant clown shoe on my fat chest. I remember trying to squirm, and I remember wanting to scream and cry for help, but it never happened. He proceeded to spray the crotch of my pants, and in a sing-song voice, he cooed, "Piggy goin', piggy pee, piggy goin', pee pee," until the contents of the bottle were drained. When he removed his foot from my chest, I lashed out with my feet, kicking at his shins and trying to scurry away at the same time. I ran into a pantry and slammed the door. It was a really terrible hiding place. He had to have seen where I went. The pantry was about 4 feet away from where I was laying on the floor just moments ago. It was dark, and it smelled of Pine Sol cleaning solvent. There was no lock on the inside to protect me from the clown, and in the dark pantry, I slid to the floor, trying not to sob uncontrollably. Minutes passed, but those minutes felt like hours. I heard no other sound other than my wheezing and a fear fart that squeaked out. "Oh, piggy piggy, did you make poopy in the pantry?" The voice came from inside the dark pantry in which I was hiding, or so I thought. I froze in fear, not moving, not breathing. I didn't know where the clown was. If he was in the pantry with me, I needed to get out. If he was out there, I needed to stay in the pantry. I lowered my head to the floor and squinted through the gap between the bottom of the pantry door and the floor. There wasn't much to see. What little light bled through the bottom of the door was quickly blacked out, and a bloodshot eye stared back at me from the other side of the door. There was a low, guttural laugh and a voice that either hissed, "Boo piggy," or "Poo piggy." I squeezed my eyes shut and started crying at a near hysterical level. The door swung open and I screamed as loud as I could. Standing in the doorway was my dad. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. I told him all about this clown. The clown was nowhere to be seen, but he carried me out of the pantry and out of the house, back to the safety of our own home. Hey guys, that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you liked those stories. Let me know which one you preferred the most. Leave us a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll be back next time with another creepy video. I'll see you then.